Hey guys, welcome back to some more videos. The Horror Boy here, the Explorer 4, and today I am joined once again by my best friend here, Resurrection Reviews, aka Steve. Welcome, Steve, to the live stream.
Rock on. Much love to everybody. Glad to be here, Nate.
And today we're going to be continuing our episodes on the horrors of the decades. This is episode 4. And as we get through these, we'll be getting through more of the decades pretty much. Almost every episode covers either a decade or 2 decades, sometimes even 3 decades. But this episode in particular, we're going to be starting off with a very interesting decade because it's probably my favorite decade for horror. I bounce back and forth between this decade and the 70s because they're really both just great times for horror films. But we're getting into the 1980s. And Steve, do you want to start us off or do you want me to start? It's totally up to you. I like to give
Uh,
my
um,
guest freedom.
I think I'll go ahead and start us off real quick. I'm going to crack open my beverage, as I'm sure you are going to as well. So let's get this going.
All right, I got
I've,
me a sweet tea glass here.
awesome. I've got a mocha espresso beverage from Private Selection, which is, of course, Kroger. Mm.
Nice. Is it good?
Not great, but not terrible. Pretty good
Yeah,
stuff.
I've gotten their natural ginger ale and natural root beer. Do not get that tastes like dirt roots.
All right.
It tastes
So,
like
so just to go ahead and start off with what I think is one of the truly most influential horror films of the 1980s, if not horror films in general, is the original Friday the 13th. I've, of course, got the huge box set here just because, why not? But we're, of course, going to be focusing on the first one. And the very first picture has a spoiler, but who cares? Everybody knows it. But Friday the
pretty much.
13th for me is, I think, the first big one that we should discuss.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Because without Friday the 13th, the horror, the decade of the 80s would not have as much horror impact without Friday the 13th. Because a big part of the 80s was, of course, slasher films, and slasher films were kind of born out of the 80s. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that Friday the 13th is the first slasher movie. That's a very far fetched saying that because of Black Christmas, because of Chainsaw Massacre, and plenty of movies before that were done with people, hacking and slashing other people. But I think Friday the 13th really established this formula that carried on even to today, and I don't know. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it's one of the most important, not only slasher films from that era, but just horror films.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, I mean, a lot of people have their favorites out of the series that are probably different from the first movie. My favorite's part six, but I also really enjoy the original, and I enjoy a lot of them, if not all of them. I love a lot of those movies. But the big thing I think to look at with Friday the 13th is the fact that, I mean, it was this very low budget independent movie, a lot like Halloween, specifically kind of a Halloween clone, as one might say, or a rip off of Halloween. Um, and what they kind of did is just took Halloween and added all that extra gore and a little bit more of a sleazy atmosphere and all this different stuff, and set it out in a camp. Got an unseen killer to go and do with all that stuff. Added these sort of themes of um, nature coming against these people who have committed some form of sin against the world, or sin against Mrs. Voorhees or Jason himself, or any of these things. Um, they took all that and put it all together, and somehow just created this winning formula. I mean, just about every Friday the 13th movie made money in the 1980s, except for maybe, Part 8, even though I love Part 8. But, I mean, yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
it's
think
it's a
Part Nine
winning
made much money
formula.
either.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's just a great winning formula. Basically, all the slashers afterwards really went for a Friday the 13th vibe over a Halloween vibe. Always more gore, always pushing the gore envelope or the nudity envelope or anything like that. And it just kind of ends up being sort of the genesis of that style of slasher movie. There were even some that came out after Friday the 13th that had been written before Friday the 13th, but let's be honest, they got their financial success because they were so similar to Friday the 13th. So you got all that going on. Plus, it's just a really fun movie. The original movie is. I mean, just a great crowd movie. Great movie to watch with a crowd. You can't really get many better movies to watch in a big group. Get some drinks, get some friends, and go hang out. I mean, it's an awesome time if you've ever done it. So.
Yeah, like I've always found it too, because growing up, pretty much growing up and watching the first 3 movies was mainly the ones I watched. I found that even though that Friday the 13th is mainly, obviously supposed to be towards a adult demographic, I thought like if you were a kid on TV back in the day and you was watching the AMC Fear Fest and they had the censored versions of these movies, I think even like kids and teens and adults and all these people that can watch these movies, I think that's really where that power kind of spawned for the slasher movies, is that really a lot of people can watch them. And also because, I mean, really without Friday the 13th, there wouldn't be this formula. And I got to say that I appreciate what it created, and what it made. And even though the slasher movies really haven't, like in a long time, haven't been great, but, I can appreciate what they do nowadays, trying to create new stuff. It just kind of, slasher films nowadays are kind of in a bizarre place, if you ask me.
I would say so, yeah. They are in a bizarre place because all of them are just sort of trying to either be retreads of the 1980s movies, or they're trying to do something different that usually just doesn't work. That's the big problem here. But one thing I want to mention that you mentioned and really hit on hard for me is the fact that, like, especially the original is appropriate for just about any audience. You take out one scene, not even one scene, one shot, and that movie's fine to show to virtually anybody over the age of 8.
Right.
It's scary. It's got a little bit of graphic violence, but you take out like one shot of nudity, and you could show like an 8 or 9-year-old that movie, and they'd be scared. It'd probably creep them out quite a lot, and you'd have to be around them for a while so that they would go to bed and everything, but they'd still have a good time. That's what's really great about the original, and I would say the same thing about a lot of the Friday the 13th movies. Part 4, of course, is probably the one that Part 4 and Part 5 that you couldn't show everybody, more sleazy atmosphere and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a really important thing as well. The fact that it did appeal to a teenage audience, a teenage through adult audience. And that's the people that were going to see them. And I mean, I'm sure you and I probably saw them before we should have seen them,
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, we're the audience they're going for. They're going for strong themes of sex and violence, and Part 6 even has a lot of rock and roll in there. So I mean, you throw all that stuff in, you got a winning formula for kids.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder, because we'll touch on this a little bit later, because these are also some movies that we're going to be touching on later. I've always been curious of why we consider certain films from 1980s slasher movies, and really when we look back on them, they don't really have that much, either that many slashing or that many scenes. But I've always wondered, Nightmare on Elm Street does have deaths in it, but it's not like
You've broken up here for me. Yeah, you've broken up here for me. I can't hear you right now. But just so we're not totally dead air or anything, if we are dead air, in fact, I mean, Gideon joined.
I think it focuses more on the dream aspect and the concept more than it being just a slasher
Yeah, I agree with that. It looks like Gideon just joined.
So
And now there's two of you.
there is two of me. What's going on? Are we still live? Let me check and see if this is broadcasting.
It's showing live. It's showing live for me. Goodness.
Same for me.
How you doing, Gideon?
Pretty good, bud. How you been?
I'm fine. How's the movie going?
Very long and very tedious.
Okay, great. You got any actors yet?
Oh yeah, a bunch of them.
Awesome. I'm glad.
I've been up for about probably 4 days straight working on stuff.
Goodness, you need some coffee.
Here
I
now.
don't drink
It
it.
was like a good dollar. So,
Eh.
oh, he's here.
Yep.
The stream just got so broken up on my end. I can barely hear you guys.
Can you hear me now?
All right, so I think now that we're all back together and connected,
Let me
now,
fix my mic.
yeah, everything's. It's like you. It's like make a jigsaw puzzle and then fix everything. Oh my god! I just went away.
Yeah, I caught about half of that, but
All right, I think the stream is pretty steady now. But what I was saying was, Nightmare on Elm Street is considered to be a slasher movie, and it does have a body count, but I don't know if that was maybe what they were intending to make a slasher movie, or maybe it's just because it has death scenes that we call it a slasher movie.
yeah, I would call it a slasher, but I would call it a slasher.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I would only call it a slasher to a pretty specific degree. You know, I could only. Yeah, I
Hello?
can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Am I coming in really low?
No, it's just my audio was so delayed for some reason.
Gotcha. How about you, Gid? Can you hear everybody?
Yeah, I can hear you really good.
Okay, awesome. All right.
Do I sound good or do I sound muffled?
You sound like Mark Hamill on Quaaludes. I don't know what that
Why,
means.
thank you.
Okay, but anyway, we were talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. I would consider it a slasher, but it's definitely a different kind of slasher. It's more supernatural, and it's got all these different elements that a lot of slashers didn't have up to that point. It's almost in some ways a creature feature, but I don't think I certainly don't think Craven wanted to make a slasher movie. I think he just wanted to make a horror movie. So I don't know. It could be a slasher, or you could call it not a slasher. I definitely think the later movies fall more into the vein of a slasher than the first one does. I'd even say, maybe the second one goes more slasher than virtually any of the other ones.
Yeah. I want to mention a movie real quick and see what your guys' thoughts are on it, because over the years, people have kind of changed their thoughts and opinions on this film, especially since Stephen King has kind of expressed his opinions on it. But what's your guys' thoughts on The Shining?
So for me, I watched The Shining too much. I watched it too much in one certain area of my life in one period, and so I got kind of burnt out on it. I don't even own it anymore, but I've been wanting to watch it recently, and I do think it's a great movie, really really great movie. Certainly not a slasher movie. But that's probably different from what we're talking about. But yeah, a great movie, fantastic. One of the best directed films ever.
Yeah, if you're wanting to stick on the slasher films, we can, because there's a lot of films that came out in the 1980s that were slasher films. We can discuss kind of um, other, probably lesser known, or maybe ones that you're personally a fan of. There's a lot of them, like The Prowler, Terror Train. We can mention a lot of them if you're really wanting to.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, Gideon? What do you think about The Shining?
Yeah, I feel like I'm the odd ones out here because I've never even seen The Shining.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it happens. um, the Blu-rays nowadays for The Shining are hard to come by, and they're kind of expensive. And the DVDs you can get pretty cheap, but they're kind of hard to find too, honestly.
Well, the reason I want to bring up The Shining is because it was a psychological movie that really, I think Stanley Kubrick really affects almost every generation. Like, he affected the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I think it's probably one of the most psychological movies from the 80s. And I think it tackles a lot of subliminal things in that movie. Like fatherhood and stress and accountability and dealing with past situations and alcoholism. Do you agree with Stanley Kubrick's? Oh, Gideon's gone. He'll come back. Do you agree with Stanley Kubrick's direction, or do you think you would have preferred seeing Stephen King's direction more?
Well, I've read the book and I've seen the movie, and I've also seen the Mick Garris directed um, uh, mini series that was more. Um, it was more akin to the book, and it was definitely like approved by Stephen King, or maybe King even wrote the script. I don't know, but I gotta say the book is better. The book is better than the movie, in my personal opinion. However, I think
Hmm.
Kubrick did the right thing for film. I think if you tried to get everything from the book into a movie, it wouldn't make as much sense. The Shining's not a very filmable book. In fact, I mean, I think Kubrick did the best that he possibly could because he did things that were so different from the book. Yeah, there's the alcoholism and all this different stuff, but Kubrick brings in a bunch more things that are more visually appealing. Um, King does a lot of stuff that works really well on the page that would not work
Yeah.
well on the screen, like these topiary animals coming to life, and uh, he's he's trying to kill them with a racquetball hammer or a croquet hammer, um, as opposed to trying to attack them with an axe. You know, it's much scarier on the page than even an axe would be, but an axe is much more imposing on the screen. So I think Kubrick did a great job. I like the book better. The book's one of the best horror novels of the 70s, in my opinion. But I do have to say it's not a filmable story.
Yeah, the way I've always looked at it was the 1980 version is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and then the 90s version is Stephen King's The Shining. So if you want to see kind of different alternate versions of the film, you can do that, because the 90s version is much more faithful to the book.
Yeah, it's
So I've always looked at it like
it's
that.
a really slow burn that 90s TV series is, and it's honestly, I'm not a big fan. I can't pop it in and watch it all the time like I could with The Shining when I was a big Shining guy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Yeah, I
own
was
that
gonna see
version.
that. I was actually gonna see the Shining miniseries.
Yeah,
I was gonna watch that version until I seen Rose Red, and I didn't really like Rose Red.
yeah. Rose Red is I don't know. I like parts of Rose Red, but in some ways, I'm not a fan of it. In a lot of ways, it's a remake of The Haunting, and Stephen King's book that he did of it was basically a remake of. But yeah, yeah, crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, that's the
hear
only
me?
reason why I didn't see that version of The Shining. Is 'cause I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, something weird happened with my phone. We're having a lot of technical difficulties, but it's Google Plus. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, it'll be gone in August, so we'll find another way,
Yeah,
possibly a better way. I don't know,
yeah.
but yeah, like I watched Rose Red. It's a 2-part miniseries, and I was gonna because I think I got a combo pack. It came with Rose Red and the Stephen King miniseries. It's like a big giant brick VHS set, not a set, but like it was like the Rose Red set, the Shining set, and they just put wrapping stuff around it, and it was like a double set. So when you bought it, you got the Shining and Rose Red. And I watched Rose Red, and I just really did not get into it. I didn't get into Salem's Lot either, but I watched Rose Red, and I was disappointed. 4 hours long, 5 hours long, something like that, and I just was like, man, I didn't really like Rose Red. Like, really, Rose Red just kind of killed it to watching The Shining for me because I would never. We'll talk about a couple of the slashers that came out that were kind of big, small, however you want to say it. Stuff like Terror Train, The Prowler, The Burning, Sleepaway Camp. These are all products that came out right after Friday the 13th. You can throw in a couple more if you know any. My Bloody Valentine. Um, really, these are all kind of same products of Friday the 13th. But what I love about these movies is that they all kind of do their own lore, their own creative kills. They add more gore to the mix. And from in my opinion, Sleepaway Camp probably had the best camp atmosphere, like an actual camp. It felt like a real camp. But as far as death scenes go, I feel like the Burning did the kills better. So really, if you look at it, if you want to watch a movie with a great camp atmosphere that feels 100% real, watch Sleepaway Camp. But if you want to watch gore effects, I'm not saying that Sleepaway Camp has bad gore effects. It has decent effects for its time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that obviously, if you look at The Burning and Sleepaway Camp, you could tell movies, so like Prom Night and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, prom night's up there for me, definitely. I think a good sort of middle ground between Sleepaway Camp and The Burning, for me at least, is Madman. Madman's a really darn good slasher movie with a lot of atmosphere, some really creative kills, some good gore, but not too much. Some funny scenes, a really, really good score, and a really, really good soundtrack theme song that'll really just blow you away. Another one kind of along those lines, but not to do with a camp, but more about sort of just backwoods, a great backwoods slasher for me would have to be Just Before Dawn. Just Before Dawn is a fantastic slasher movie that was part of possibly one of my favorite movie nights I ever had by myself. I loved Just Before Dawn. I thought it was a fantastic movie. Besides that, I would put up there Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which is one of my favorite
Ooh,
slasher films of the 1980s, period. Possibly, it might just be my favorite
good choice,
slasher
Steve.
sequel. Oh yeah. I'm a crazy Texas Chainsaw 2 fan. I love that movie.
Same here. Same here, man. It's so underrated.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everything from the way that it looks to the special effects to the script and the acting, all the characters in the movie, just fantastic stuff. Really good music that I think is a little underrated in there as well. Just a fun atmosphere that it sometimes catches you off guard with how crazy the violence is in that movie too, how crazy the scenes can get, and how scary it actually can be at some moments. The fact that it's like a hilarious black comedy, and then like while you're laughing, suddenly the characters go too far, and you stop laughing and start cringing. It's really really quite the movie. And honestly, I
Yeah,
think
man.
it
I've always loved Chainsaw 2.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, I think it's probably my favorite Toby Hooper movie of the '80s, and that's saying something considering he also did Poltergeist and he did a lot of other good stuff in the '80s. I've got to say, I think Chainsaw 2 is his best '80s movie.
Yeah, I think it had just so many creative layers to it when it comes to characters, kills, gore, effects, music, direction, atmosphere, sets. I mean, it's got a lot of great. That's a lot. Another thing that I love about that movie, man. There's some insane sets in that movie. Just insanity going on in that film.
Oh yeah.
But I think also the weird aspect, which I can always remember from this movie, where Leatherface is kind of, or Bubba, as they refer to him in this film, Bubba or Leatherface is like infatuated with this chick, and like the first time I'd ever seen a horror character that had done that. I mean, really, besides Nightmare on Elm Street 2, they kind of tackled that just a little bit, but twist on things. So I thought that was very interesting as well.
Oh yeah. Definitely. It's like it's like he's going through puberty throughout that movie. And I mean, the funny thing is, I don't think Leatherface is the strongest character in that movie as a villain. He's good, no doubt about it, and he's really good. But I mean, you've also got the cook Drayton just being over the top, really, really hilarious, but also some disturbing stuff there as well. But I mean, of course, Chop Top. I mean, Chop Top, I think, is the reason to watch the movie. Honestly, I think it's probably the reason the movie's
It steals the
got so
show.
many fans. What's that?
I think he steals the show.
Oh yeah, hardcore. He does steal the show. I mean, and that's hard to say because right up with him is frickin' Dennis Hopper being a psycho, an absolute crazy person. He's great in the movie too. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Dennis Hopper. He's actually probably better than the movie deserves, and that movie I think in some ways is
Yeah.
better than it deserves to be. I mean, it just continually got cut and cut and cut as far as the budget, and the script was being made up on the spot and all this different stuff. It's one of the craziest productions in all of canon history, and that's crazy because it's canon. You know, uh, there's so much stuff going on in that movie that's really really cool. I don't have enough good things to say about it, and you know, we're talking influential horror movies. I mean, it might not be incredibly influential on horror movies in general, or inspired a new genre or anything like that, but it gave Bill Moseley a career. I mean, Bill Moseley's been in several really great projects, from this to House of a Thousand Corpses, and of course Devil's Rejects, and working with Rob Zombie all the time, and working on a lot of little independent things as well. It has really given him a career and given him the ability to be a part of a
Yeah.
punk band and been able to do a ton of really cool stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bill Moseley went on to go do some really great things as a result of this film. And Bill Moseley, I gotta say, it's just one of the coolest guys because he's so passionate about what he does, and he's, from what I've heard, such a cool guy behind the scenes, and he's very good to his fans. You know, he's always been very passionate about what he does. He cares about his fans, and I've always heard he was a really cool guy to meet with at conventions and stuff like that. But before we move on to the next subject, which would be on remakes from the 80s, I wanted to just kind of have you, because I haven't seen any of these movies. I was wondering if you've seen any of these short, not short slasher films, these ones that were kind of lesser known that I never really seen. Happy Birthday to Me, Bloody Birthday, Visiting Hours, not Mad Men, Intruder, I think is what it's called. Um, have you seen any of these movies? You got any like sort of smaller slasher film recommendations for any of those films?
So, Happy Birthday to Me is awesome. I also love Happy Birthday to Me because it was also part of that big, that slasher double feature that was one of my favorite movie nights by myself. I watched that and Just Before Dawn. Both are fantastic. Happy Birthday to Me is more of sort of a city slasher movie, you know, a slasher movie that goes around kind of on campus and in suburbs and stuff like that. It's got some cool moments. It's got a couple really wacky kills, but it's also an interesting kind of psychological movie. I've been a big fan of it. Some people don't like it. It's definitely a slow burn, and it's got a weird, twisty plot. It's also much higher budgeted than a lot of these other slasher movies that we've been talking about because it actually did have a big studio behind it. And yet, the weirdest thing is we don't really have a lot of good special features for this movie. Actually, both Blu-rays that have been released of this
Yeah,
movie don't have any special features.
yeah.
I
I never even heard about this movie until word of mouth, to be honest.
Oh yeah, and it's still a pretty darn good movie. Really, really good cinematography and acting. Can't say enough good stuff about that. The characters are wacky, to say the most. To be honest, it's just they're the acting is good, but the characters you don't really sympathize with a whole lot of them. You really sympathize with maybe one or two, and the rest are just total jerks that you're just like, please kill these people off. Um, but it's still a really, really fun movie. I would also say you mentioned Bloody Birthday, which I thought was also a really fun movie. Um, Kind of fits into the killer kid genre as well as a slasher movie. Got some really inventive kills, got some disturbing stuff in there. Fun movie. I haven't seen Intruder, and I haven't seen whatever the other one was that you mentioned. I can't remember what that was.
Visiting Hours.
Say that one more time.
Visiting Hours.
Visiting Hours. No, I haven't seen that one. I'm thinking of picking up the Blu-ray as soon as I can, but yeah, I haven't seen those two. I would recommend for a very fun, low-budget slasher movie, The Mutilator. The Mutilator is really expensive to buy, to say the least, and not what you would say is a great movie, maybe not even well made, but great gore scenes. Really fun stuff going on in the movie. Hilarious characters. So bad it's good style acting.
Are you a fan of Slumber Party Massacre?
I like Slumber Party Massacre, but as you know, I'm not a big nudity and horror films guy, and all three of those movies have a ton of nudity in them. Um, But if you look past that, if you're like me and you don't like nudity in horror films, if you can skip past those moments, all three movies have really good moments in them. The third one is totally wacky off the wall, so bad it's good. There's such crazy stuff that happens in that movie. You at one moment your killer is like laughing and crazy and attacking women and stuff like that. And then in the next moment, he's like, I was molested by my uncle as a child. And you almost feel sorry for him. Then he goes back to
What the
hacking
hell?
people up with a drill. And And then after that, there's a point in the movie where there are these like 2 or 3 women that are trying to escape this
Mhm.
house, and the only thing in their way is a table that is in front of like um, a big glass door. They can't get around this freaking table. They
Oh my
just don't know how to get around a table. It's like a folding table too. It's not tough to get around, but they can't get around it. Um, Also, just really horrible acting in all 3 movies,
Oh,
but
that's wonderful.
also examples of some really good acting in the first movie. The guy who plays the killer is actually really creepy. He's got really kind of Charles Manson-esque kind of thing going there. And uh, a lot of the kills, of course, are amazing in those movies. But uh, and I do own them. I do own them on the Roger Corman three pack set that Shout Factory released before Scream Factory existed. But really cool movies. I think I would recommend them to people who like slasher movies and don't mind to skip through some nudity.
Yeah. Yeah, we can go on for hours upon hours about these kind of lesser known slasher films that kind of came out, and that new wave of slasher right after Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th Part 2 propelled that even more. And you got a lot of movies between 1981 and 1986 or 7, and really afterwards too. But really those were kind of, and if you want to look at the golden years, I mean, really it's 1980 to 1984 is really when the slasher films were really going strong. But really, there was also movies coming out after that too. But by '87, the slasher movies were kind of starting to go down. Around that point, Friday the 13th Part 7, the new one was being made, and you got. I mean, you did get Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but at that time it was starting to slow down a little bit. But if you guys want to go back to the '80s at all and check out some of these slasher movies, um, I definitely recommend it. I've only seen The Prowler, Terror Train, Sleepaway Camp, Burning. I still have a lot to see. I still haven't seen Sleepaway Camp 2, 3, or 4. I haven't seen The Mutilator. I haven't seen Summer Party Massacre. What is that called? Sorority Row.
The House on Sorority Row.
The House on Sorority Row. I haven't seen that. The Initiation. Haven't seen that. Um, there's still a lot that I haven't seen, but I look forward to Power Drill Massacre, or not Power Drill. Is it called Power Drill Massacre?
There, I'm not sure. I haven't heard about this actually.
Well, no, there's a game called Power Drill Massacre. It was like a sleazy '80s horror slasher that came out, like a Power Drill Massacre or Drill Massacre or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but I know there's a game called Power Drill Massacre, but there's also like a sleazy '80s horror film. But yeah, there's all kinds of them, really. And to get on to our next topic, talking about remakes of the 1980s, of course, these were films that remade movies from the 50s and the 60s and thereon. Talking about movies like The Thing, The Fly, The Blob. What are your thoughts on these movies that were kind of remaking movies from the 50s and 60s?
Well, I think they did what we or our generation of horror filmmakers has been trying to do. They did that, but they were successful, and they did really good stuff. They took this material that they had seen as children and had a lot of fun with, and found to be really scary and really good. And then they either made them better or they did an equally good job. I would say in the case of The Thing, which is my favorite horror film of all time, I gotta say uh, I think it's probably improved over the '50s version. I haven't seen the '50s version, so I can't really really say. The Fly, of course, is great. I think that's probably at least equally as good. And I know one that for sure is equally as good as its original is, of course, The Blob. all movies featuring the Blob are good, in my opinion. Just if you've got a movie and you've got big slimy things just crawling all over people and eating them and stuff like that, I'm 100% for you. Keep going. Do another remake or do another sequel at this point. I don't care. I'm sure they could do some awesome stuff nowadays, honestly, with the Blob, as long as they just, kind of stick to the same idea, which is, big blob eats people, maybe some type of social commentary, but maybe not too much. That's
Yeah.
what I get from the Blob. I like all three of those movies. There was even, I think, probably the movie that started this big trend was when they remade Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the late 70s. I think it was 78. And then after that, I think the studio started to decide, oh, well, we can make money on our old movies we made way back in the day by getting hip horror directors to just go ahead and remake them. And that's what they did. And generally, they did a really good job. Like I said, The Thing is my favorite horror movie of all time. It's in my top 5 favorite movies of all time, period. I think The Blob and The Fly are really great examples of great 80s horror movies that do a lot of really good work with the special effects of the time. That's really the big star of all three of these movies, is just these awesome special effects. But you can't even say that, especially for The Thing, because The Thing has such good acting and writing and such good cinematography and everything that it just kind of, that overshadows all those special effects. I would say the same thing for The Fly. But just brilliant stuff going on in all those movies. And generally what's weird is they have this sort of minimalist atmosphere, or not atmosphere, but approach. They have this minimalist approach to the movies. I mean, The Thing has a very small cast of all men. And in fact, the crew was mostly men. It was 100% men by the time that they actually got up to Alaska. Or wherever it was that they decided to film it. It might have been in might have been somewhere in Canada. But anyway, very small cast. The same thing with The Fly. If you watch The Fly, there's not a very big cast. I would say probably The Blob has the biggest of these three casts. But yeah, interesting stuff going on there. Very minimalist in terms of just the people and the economy of the movies. And that helped them generally to make a lot of money, except for The Thing, of course. I mean, we all know what happened to The Thing. It just died a horrible death and killed John Carpenter's career, basically. I mean, he was relegated to these crazy, weird little
All because of
projects.
E.T.
Yeah. Yeah, just crazy stuff. Crazy stuff.
E.T.
All because of E.T. And the
Well,
thing
don't
is,
make a death battle between E.T. and The Thing.
well, the thing is, both those movies are great, and they're kind of mirrors of each other. E.T. is a great, wonderful family alien movie, and then The Thing is a great, wonderful adult horrific alien movie. I don't know, they're kind of mirrors of each other. It kind of would make me very gleefully happy if at some point somebody went into the wrong theater when they were still showing E.T. and all of a sudden they accidentally went into The Thing and brought all their little kids in there.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
oh no, the dogs are turning into giant worm monsters. Goodness.
I'm surprised The Thing didn't take shots at E.T. or they didn't make some marketing back and forth.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, Toy Story 4 and Child's Play did that this year. They could have done that way back in the day.
For sure. But yeah, all great movies and a great topic to talk about, of course. What do you think about them, Nate?
Well, I gotta say, even though one's not a remake, I always lop in the stuff with these movies. I feel like all 4 movies are a great example of different metaphors, different ideas. The Thing is about this being that can transform into any living organism and imitate it perfectly. And I've always thought that was a very interesting idea. And the stuff was about consumerism and the food people were eating back in the day and being more aware of what you were putting in your body. Blob, I don't really think there's any kind of hidden message behind it. It's just kind of like like government screw up kind of lead to this. You could say that with The Mist as well, but I think all four of those movies, or we were supposed to talk about the three of them. Um, I think The Thing, The Blob, and The Fly, the big three these or those, but um, they all have great special effects. I thought were very well done, and really they were all kind of on the same level. And that's why I bring up that argument of CGI versus practical effects, because nowadays CGI is held so high. If I show somebody a scene from The Blob, it's kind of like this was all 100% practical. How can you say this is? Look how realistic this looks, and look how realistic The Fly looks, and The Thing. I think they were revolutionary special effects, and I think it was how you do remakes the right way. You know, you take the original concept and you improve upon it. And one day I want to do a stream where we discuss remakes, because I think remakes, especially nowadays, are starting to get more and more and more and more popular. And they're doing this thing. I gotta bring this up real quick, Steve. They're doing this thing that really irritates me, where they're saying, "Oh, this is not Halloween the remake. This is a 2018 Halloween movie, but it's not Halloween the remake. We're just gonna call it Halloween." Um, if they made a Jason movie, it would be considered a reboot, but they would title it something to make it sound like a remake. It's like either make it a remake or make it a sequel. Don't make it this weird in between version of a movie where it's not really a remake, not really a sequel. It's kind of a spin-off, weird thingy. But I hate how they do that. I just had to mention that real quick. But this is how you do remakes. You make a new concept with an original idea. And I think the only really good example of that nowadays is It. I think It took the original novel, took the original miniseries, and did their own thing with it. I think It kind of did their own thing with that concept. But everything else has kind of been copying. And, I think all three movies are just fantastic. But do you got
Oh,
any movies you want to bring up, or you want to add on to that?
well, just to add on one real quick thing, you were talking about the metaphors. I think the Blob comes around at the perfect time to comment again about communism. The Blob originally sort of was a metaphor for communism. This big red thing that was sort of amorphous. We didn't understand, but it was from another place, and it was really trying to destroy us. This is all about communist propaganda, and it's back again, and it's all about communism. I mean, it came out in the late '80s, right around when Reagan was starting to kind of go into his decline, but also when he was starting to do some of his best work in defeating the Soviet Union and finally making an end to the reign of communism in Russia. I think it has to do a lot with communism as well as a lot of
Nicole,
other stuff. Definitely the Cold War, yeah. Um, but anything else about remakes? I mean, I think that'd be a really great topic because despite the fact that a lot of us on YouTube are really negative about remakes, there are not a lot, but there are at least probably 10 really, really good ones that have come out in the
right?
past, 20 years. But, it is despite the fact there's maybe 10 really good ones, for every 10 really good ones, there's about, I don't know, another 20 really, really bad ones, that you just have to put out of your mind. And I may say that something's really good or at least entertaining, and somebody else may entirely have a totally different take on it. For instance, a lot of people really liked the Friday the 13th remake. I thought it was garbage, and a lot of people still will sometimes defend the Halloween remake, and not a fan, But anyway,
Right.
moving on from remakes, though, there was another movie I wanted to bring up. We already talked about The Thing, which was one of the other ones that I did have over here to just, bring up and show on screen and such. But after that, I do have what I think is the other really influential horror film of the 1980s that really sort of broke the mold as far as just really intense experiments in terror, and that's The Evil Dead.
Ooh,
Of course, The Evil Dead may be one of the most popular trilogies in all of horror, um, transcending horror in some aspects. I mean, a lot of people will say that Army of Darkness is their favorite. I would probably say that out of this trilogy, Army of Darkness is my favorite too. But also, you can't count out the first two movies. A lot of people really don't think about the first movie as much as the others, and I would be somebody that also is guilty of that. But I think we do need to re-examine the first movie, which, despite the fact that it has you know, a lot of really serious material in it, also has some unintentional laughs and some intentional laughs that really kind of put us forward into this comedy horror thing in the 1980s. It really raises the bar for gore, raises the bar for what you can do with cinematography in a horror movie. This is influential even
Sound.
on, sound, of course, of course. Um, and I would say this also influences, in my opinion, one of the greatest duos in the history of filmmaking, the Coen brothers. If you watch any of the Coen brothers' early movies, they're obviously influenced by Sam Raimi. They were friends with Sam Raimi and made a movie with Sam Raimi at one point. But a lot of their early films have a lot of cinematography that look a lot like The Evil Dead. Um, so there's that going on. Of course, influential on possession movies and zombie movies of that decade and into the future as well. We got Ash versus Evil Dead out of it. We got basically Bruce Campbell's entire career out of these movies, specifically the original Evil Dead. I don't think people actually give it enough credit anymore because the second one's so good and because the third one is so good as a cult classic and so funny. Um, but The Evil Dead is a brilliant movie, really well made, despite the fact that it's got a lot of budgetary limitations and some of the special effects don't look great. But that kind of helps it, in my opinion. If you watch that movie and see some of the really lo-fi special effects, they're still really gross looking, really creepy looking special effects. So, in my opinion, really, really great stuff. What do you think about The Evil Dead as far as like influentialness and stuff like that?
Well, for me, I've always been in kind of the minority of the group because I've always loved the original the best because I think it's a very good serious horror film. Um, Evil Dead 2 I think is amazing as well. They're all three great in their own ways. I mean, if you want to watch a serious horror film, you can watch the first one. If you want to watch a horror comedy, you can watch the second one. If you want to watch more of a fantastical, if you want to watch more of a fantasy movie, watch Army of Darkness. Um, with little bits of horror in there, but it's more of an action fantasy movie. So I think that's one of the stronger pillars of the franchise. But for me, Evil Dead 1 was so great because I think it showed filmmakers back in the 1980s that you could make a movie despite your budget, despite your experience, despite your age, what you have.
Hey, brother, you're silent on me right now. I don't know if we're dead air or not.
And the Woods of Tennessee with money that they all got up together, you know.
Heard you for a minute and now you're silent on me again. Had technical difficulties tonight, folks.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. I'm gonna check and see if the stream is still going or not. I don't know. Is it? Steve, can you hear me?
Am I back?
Hey. Sorry about that.
Am I back?
My internet messed up on my computer, so I'm doing it from my phone now.
Nice.
What were you saying, Steve?
Well, I just remembered you talking about the Evil Dead and how cool it was that they, scraped all this money together and went to Tennessee and made the movie. That's all that I remember.
Yeah, pretty much that was the gist of it. I mean, it really showed people in the 1980s that you could really go out and make a movie if you really wanted to, and that's always something that I've respected about Evil Dead. And it's always been my personal favorite because it's a hardcore gore fest, and it's really serious. It takes this evil entity serious. For me, the franchise kind of morphed into making fun of this kind of stuff and becoming more of a comedy. I like that, but I prefer it more serious, like in this movie where you really didn't know. By the end of Evil Dead, you do not know, like, if this man is he's insane or is just playing games with them. You don't know. I like that a little bit more. But the first Evil Dead, I think, is very influential because of effects, budget, and just all that crazy stuff. But yeah, I've always loved the first one better than the other ones.
Yeah, I think it's a really brilliant movie and just really influential on low budget filmmaking and really influential on the movie on the movie community in general. Just because, well, I mean, started Sam Raimi's career. Really prolific, great filmmaker that's done some really great movies and some really terrible movies, but mostly did really good stuff. Just
I'm
based
a fan
on.
of Oz. I said it.
Well, I haven't seen that, so I can't judge him on that. I have to say I hate Drag Me to Hell. I hate Spider-Man 3, but I think the first two Spider-Man movies are among the greatest of the superhero movies, at least in that early period before Marvel really got kicked off. But I do have to say I think Sam Raimi's a great director that's definitely got, I think he's where he wants to be right now.
Yeah. I think one of the best things about Evil Dead, though, is the third act. I think it has probably one of the best third acts ever.
Yeah, really brilliant third act. One of the cool things that I heard about Evil Dead once is that Alice Cooper is a big fan of it, and Alice once said that he thinks he was watching Evil Dead and he said there can't be any more blood in this movie, and instantly that's when the giant pipe breaks and a bunch of blood just pours out over Bruce Campbell. Uh, so he's just like, I love that movie, and he said he thinks it's a great master comedy horror movie. I think he says that he prefers it over all the others because it was so slapstick and crazy, despite the fact that it had a more serious tone than any of the others.
Yeah. I've always found that very interesting as well because the ending Sam Raimi went all out. They used up all the budget, got some just shots that I thought were wow, like the camera going over Bruce Campbell's head and then zooming down and that sound effect that it makes and going past the ceiling boards and that boom, wom sound effect. It was just so creepy. And the mirror scene, I mean, I could go on and on about it, but really just, round of applause, Sam Raimi, for doing that ending, because I thought it really. And Evil Dead 2, I think one of the best things about Evil Dead 2 is it kind of turns that ending. And many reviewers have said this. It kind of makes that ending of Evil Dead throughout the entire film. So that's pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, really cool stuff.